The war-reading silence closed around Odelia Brant's throat one breath before she could stop a war. Blue fire burned along the rim of the treaty forge of Lorne, turning the bronze scale plates on the walls the color of winterbone. The forge did not remember treaties like an archive. It tested whether a written clause still answered the living wound that gave it law. It could not name liars, only darken a copy whose pressure no longer matched its source scar. Treaty Minister Selvar Drome held up 3 copied scar rubbings from the ash scar war dragon's left flank. The lines had been pressed in soot, oil, and hammered silver. To anyone without training, they looked exact. To Odelia, they looked obedient. That was worse. The Eastern Crown broke the truce at Blackwater Ridge, Selvar announced. The third healing line permits retaliation without further witness. Odelia stepped to the lower rail before the clerk could enter the claim. That is not what the scar says. The silence seal struck before her next word. Cold pressure tightened beneath her jaw, leaving her able to breathe, but unable to shape sound. Orlan Bryce had lifted 2 fingers from the dragonbone throne, and treaty procedure had removed her voice. The seal was meant to stop unlicensed claims during active war review. It was never meant to remove the only living reader trained to compare a copy against the scar that gave the clause authority. Dragon King Orlan wore black war plate and the scarlet mantle of command. A dispatch lay open beside his hand. 2 border keeps had reported cavalry movement. 1 village had burned before dawn. The Eastern Army was assembling, claiming the movement was defensive. Selvar turned toward Odelia with grave patience. Mistress Brant has objected to every military reading since her husband's death. Grief can sharpen memory. It can also make memory serve the dead. The scribes lowered their eyes as though her discrediting were an administrative necessity. Odelia placed both palms on the witness rail. She had read healed scale patterns for 19 years. She knew the difference between a battle wound, a treaty scar, and a later burn that changed the pressure around it. Her husband, Marek Brant, had died carrying an original scar plate out of a collapsing archive. The plate had not named the hand that wanted it buried. It had only taught Odelia to distrust perfect copies. Selvar had spent the year since calling that death proof of the Brant's obsession. Orlan looked at her once. He looked as though delay itself might kill soldiers. She answered the only way the silence allowed. She touched 2 fingers to the first copied line, then the second, then drew them apart. Comparison required. Selvar saw the gesture. The living comparison is unnecessary. The rubbings were certified by 3 royal copyists. Odelia struck the rail once. Not sufficient. The ash scar is wounded and volatile, Selvar continued. Bringing him into treaty fire for a widow's private doubt would risk every person here. Private doubt. The clerk wrote it. Years earlier, Orlan had stood beside her in the lower eyrie while the ash scar tore iron rings from a wall. Odelia had told him not to command the dragon's pain into silence. She had given him a phrase instead. Hold the heat where truth can bear it. He remembered. She saw the words move soundlessly behind his teeth, but he did not speak them. He signed the retaliation order. He had remembered her warning and chosen the copy anyway. The dragon screamed beneath the forge. Bronze shutters burst inward. Heat rolled through the chamber, carrying ash and the scent of rain on hot stone. Guards drew spears as the ash scar forced his head through the eastern arch. 1 horn was broken, his right eye clouded white, and blackened scales lay fused from shoulder to hip. He did not charge the throne. He turned away from it. The ash scar placed his scarred flank toward Odelia and lowered 1 wing until the burned scale field stood exposed to the treaty forge. He was not choosing her. He was presenting the living wound to the lawful comparison the chamber had refused to conduct. Blue fire bent toward the copied rubbings in Selvar's hands. The soot lines darkened. Silver leaf curled inward. Then every copied treaty mark burned black, not erased, but stained with the flat color that appeared when recorded pressure no longer matched the living scar. Selvar lowered the pages. A failed copy does not establish the Eastern Crown's innocence. It may indicate age, contamination, or damage during transfer. He was right, and Odelia hated him more for using the limit honestly. The forge had condemned the copies, not the border report. The blackened rubbings proved only that the court could not rely on them. They did not prove who altered them when the change occurred, whether Selvar knew or whether the Eastern Army had broken the truce elsewhere. Orlan rose. Release her voice. The pressure vanished. The release did not undo the silence. It only proved he needed her, after using law to remove her. The chamber waited for Odelia to translate the living scars before the king's signed order became blood. She did not approach the dragon. First, seal those copies under neutral custody. The border is moving while you demand paperwork. The border is moving under a treaty you have failed to produce accurately. Orlan descended one step. Read the original. No, I will not translate another command while either army can act on a disputed record. Suspend your retaliation. Send the same suspension demand east under joint seal, then bring independent readers to the living scar. You are withholding treaty service from the crown, Selvar said. I am refusing to turn uncertainty into graves. The Ashkar's burned scales began to glow beneath the blue fire. One narrow line, nearly hidden under an old siege burn, brightened from shoulder to rib. Odelia knew that line. It was not a retaliation clause. It was the emergency restraint Marek had died preserving. The hidden line had not cleared the Eastern Crown. It showed that the retaliation clause was not the clause answering the forge's heat. It only made retaliation without joint restraint unlawful. Odelia looked at the king who had silenced her and signed beneath a false copy. Your Majesty, if that order leaves this forge, it will not enforce the treaty. The hidden scar flared blue-white. It will break it. Orlan tore the retaliation seal from the order before the blue-white line on Ashka's flank had cooled. Close both dispatch gates, he said. No war command leaves the treaty forge. Prepare a joint suspension demand for the Eastern Crown. Selvar did not object to the suspension. He objected to what it meant. A failed copy does not stop cavalry, he said, nor does it restore a burned village. We can suspend retaliation without pretending the border threat has vanished. The threat has not vanished, Odelia said. Neither has the law. Orlan ordered the 3 blackened rubbings placed beneath separate glass shields and sealed by the forge clerk, a military witness, and a reader unaffiliated with Selvar's ministry. He did not apologize for silencing her. He did not restore the treaty office Marek's death had cost her. Instead, he granted her temporary standing as a living scar witness for this examination alone. The wording mattered. It allowed her to compare source and copy. It did not return her authority to issue treaty readings, instruct royal scribes, or enter ministerial archives without escort. Odelia accepted the standing because soldiers were already waiting beneath banners. She did not mistake necessity for repair. The emergency restraint is reciprocal, she told the clerk. Both crowns must receive the same demand, under the same hour mark. If only one army is ordered to stop, the clause has not been obeyed. Selvar folded his hands behind his back. Then, let both messengers ride. Meanwhile, inspect the copies you have condemned. The forge condemned their match, Odelia said. Not their makers. A small shift passed through Selvar's expression. Approval, perhaps, that she had preserved the distinction he intended to use. The copy room stood behind the forge wall, where blue fire could not touch unfinished records. 3 royal copyists were brought in separately. Orlan remained beyond the inner witness rail. His presence carried authority. but Odelia refused to let it become evidence. The first copyist, an elderly woman named Tavia Morn, said she had pressed the upper scar line from a silvered plate delivered by Selvar's office. She had never seen Ashskar's living flank. The second, Pel Arnott, had copied the lower line from an older rubbing, already bearing a certification knot. He had assumed the knot proved contact with the dragon. The third, a young man named Edrin Vale, had taken the center pressure mark from Ashskar himself 6 months earlier under stable fire. Odelia examined their tools, pressure combs, soot tins, and work logs. Their hands trembled for different reasons. Tavia feared dismissal. Pel feared prosecution. Adrian feared that his true work had been used to steady 2 false companions. "None of you will answer for another person's page," Odelia said. "Describe only what touched your hands." Selvar's counsel immediately requested that sentence be entered. It protected the copyists from collective accusation. It also protected Selvar from conclusions built on their fear. The glass shields were opened one at a time. Edrin's center rubbing carried the faint, uneven drag of living scale. Ashskar had breathed while the pressure comb passed over him. The line widened near the rib and narrowed again as the dragon exhaled. Tavia's upper rubbing was too still. Odelia laid a measuring thread across the soot impression. Every ridge held identical depth. No scar on a breathing creature remained that exact across 12 inches of rib. "This came from a plate," she said. Tavia nodded. "A scar plate. That was how it was labeled." "A plate can preserve shape," Odelia said. "It cannot preserve living pressure." Selvar stepped closer to the outer rail. "Treaty law permits plate copies when the dragon cannot be safely presented. Only if the plate was itself taken from the living scar under witnessed heat, and you have not proved that it was not." "No," Odelia said. "I have proved only that this rubbing never touched Ashskar." The distinction entered the record. Pel's lower rubbing presented a harder problem. Its pressure varied enough to resemble living contact, but the variation repeated in a pattern too regular for breath. Odelia asked for the certification knot. Pel produced the attached record strip. The knot belonged to a plate registry, not a living scar examination. Orlan's voice came from beyond the rail. "Who authorized the plate?" Pel swallowed. The request carried the treaty ministry mark. Selvar did not turn. "My ministry issues hundreds of requests. A ministry mark identifies routing, not authorship." Again, a defense with room inside it. Odelia read the strip twice. The plate number had been partly scraped, but 4 digits remained. They matched the damaged index attached to Marek Brant's final archive report. Her hands went still. Orlan noticed. "What is it?" "A reference," she said. Not an answer. The clerk brought Marek's old index from sealed storage. It listed one original scar plate removed from the Western Archive during the collapse. The description named an emergency restraint line beneath siege damage. It did not name who ordered the plate copied, who received it after Marek's death, or whether the plate in Selvar's chain was the same object. Marek's record had opened a door. It had not identified the person standing behind it. Selvar studied the index. "Your husband may have preserved the source from which the copy was lawfully made. Then the custody chain will show that. And if the chain was broken in the archive collapse, then no one had the right to present its descendant as a living match." A horn sounded from the dispatch gate. Both suspension riders had departed under matched seals. Only then did Odelia request the ministry's copy requisitions for the last year. Selvar's counsel protested that the request exceeded her temporary standing. Orlan answered without looking at Odelia. "The standing includes any document necessary to establish how the disputed rubbings entered this forge. It was not restoration. It was a narrow order, made necessary by his earlier one." The requisition ledger arrived near midnight. 3 requests bore Selvar's ministry mark. 2 had been filed after the Blackwater reports. The earliest had not. Odelia placed her finger beside its hour stamp. Selvar's office had requested copies of Ashskar's treaty, scars 2 days before the border village burned. The request did not prove Selvar had known the village would burn. It proved the false comparison had been prepared before the fire became its excuse. Selvar demanded the border intelligence logs before anyone could call the early requisition a conspiracy. A requisition before a village burns proves readiness, he said, not guilt. My office prepares contingency, copies whenever troop movement threatens a treaty line. The defense was lawful enough to require an answer. Orlan ordered the intelligence records, ministry routing books, and plate custody register brought into the treaty forge under separate seals. He did not return Odelia's former office. He extended her temporary standing only far enough to examine the disputed requisition and the documents that had carried it. He had widened her, standing only where his signed order was already breaking. You gave me standing only where your order needed repair, Odelia said. His gaze held hers across the witness rail. Yes. No apology softened the admission. No restored title disguised its limits. Selvar's counsel entered the extension before the records were opened. Living, scar witness, authority for copy, requisition, review only. Odelia could compare dates, pressure sources, and custody marks. She could not issue a new treaty, judgment, or command either army. The border intelligence log arrived first. Its earliest report had been received the evening before the village burned. Eastern cavalry had left winter quarters, crossed 2 supply roads, and assembled within half a day's ride of Blackwater Ridge. A second report noted wagon movement beneath covered banners. Neither report recorded an attack. Selvar rested one hand on the outer rail. The Crown knew forces were moving before the fire. Preparation was lawful. Odelia read each entry twice. Preparation may have been lawful. Then the timing proves nothing. It proves less than accusation, she said. More than innocence. Orlan did not intervene to make the sentence favor either side. The standard contingency form was brought next. When border movement threatened a scar-bound truce, the treaty ministry could request a complete comparison set. Restraint lines, withdrawal lines, civilian protections, retaliation limits, and repair obligations. Full sets prevented a minister from selecting only the clause most useful to the Crown. The early requisition was not a full set. It requested 1 scar. The third healing line. Odelia placed the standard form beside the ministry copy. A full treaty comparison asks for all scars. This request asked for the line that makes war easy. Selvar's expression remained controlled. Immediate threats require immediate clauses. The third line governs retaliation. My office did not need flood repair terms while cavalry gathered. You also did not request the emergency restraint beside it. That line was believed destroyed. Believed by whom? The Western Archive report. Odelia looked toward Marik's damaged index beneath its glass shield. The same report that recorded him carrying the plate out. Selvar answered without hesitation. Carrying it from a collapse does not establish where it went afterward. Again, he was right. The plate number on the requisition preserved 6 digits. 4 matched Marik's index. The remaining 2 had been written over a scraped surface. Odelia requested magnification under cold forge glass. The old cuts beneath the replacement ink could be seen, but not read with certainty. The match established that the ministry requisition referred to the same plate family Marik had preserved. It did not establish that the plate entering ministry storage was the original, a lawful duplicate, or a later substitute. The plate custody register was opened. 3 weeks after Marik's death, an object bearing the partial number had entered treaty ministry storage under emergency archive recovery. The intake description read, "Damaged silver scar plate, Western collection, military priority." It carried the ministry receiving mark and the signature of Recovery Officer Caldus Wren. "Where is Wren?" Orlan asked. The clerk searched the personnel supplement. Missing, Your Majesty. He failed to report. After a northern transfer 11 months ago, no body was recovered. Selvar's counsel spoke at once. A missing officer cannot be treated as a guilty one. He is not being treated as anything, Odelia said. The register proves intake. It does not prove who selected the plate, whether Wren inspected it, or whether the object remained unchanged in storage. Marek's plate had not accused a minister. It had reappeared in the office that needed his warning incomplete. Orlan ordered the storage seals. One seal belonged to the General Archive Room. One belonged to military treaty access. A third was a routing impression used by Selvar's ministry staff, not Selvar personally. Selvar indicated it calmly. My office received an emergency object. That is what treaty offices are built to do. Then your office should have preserved the complete scar context. If the context survived. Odelia turned another page. The custody register recorded 2 later withdrawals. The first was for conservation. The second, 6 months afterward, was for contingency preparation. Neither entry named the person who handled the plate inside the copying room. Both bore authorized ministry routing. Orlan's fingers tightened once against the rail, Odelia noticed, but she did not offer him relief. He had silenced the reader, signed the war, and only then opened the records his certainty had ignored. A bell sounded from the outer court. One joint suspension messenger had reached the Western Watch. No Eastern acknowledgement had yet returned. The armies remained under restraint, only because neither side had received permission to advance. Selvar used the silence that followed. If the Eastern Crown refuses suspension, Your Majesty will still need the third healing line. Investigate my office, but do not confuse investigation with safety. Odelia closed the custody register. And do not confuse a selected clause with a treaty. The original requisition sheet had been attached beneath a later routing cover. Its lower edge was folded under, hiding the clerk's first instruction. Odelia asked the neutral witness to lift it. The wording beneath was not the standard language for contingency preservation. The clerk read it aloud. Prepare third healing line for immediate war reading. Odelia checked the hour mark against the casualty ledger from the forge gate. The instruction had been entered 43 minutes before the first report of village deaths reached Lorne. The hour mark did not prove Selvar had ordered the fire. It proved the clause for war had been prepared before the dead were officially known. The instruction sheet was removed from the requisition chain and placed beneath a separate witness seal before Selvar could dismiss its timing as clerical haste. Immediate war reading is not conspiracy, he said. It is border readiness. The Eastern Crown had moved cavalry before the village burned. Odelia did not challenge the movement. Then the record should show who chose readiness over complete comparison. Orlan ordered the instruction authorship log and emergency phrasebook opened. He extended Odelia's standing again, this time to review the drafting and routing of war reading instructions. The order did not restore her treaty office, permit her to issue a binding interpretation, or erase the silence he had placed on her in the forge. He had given her another narrow passage through a structure that had once been hers to guard. The authorship log named Leora Ven, a junior ministry clerk assigned to emergency treaty preparation. She was brought to the inner rail without Selvar's staff beside her. A neutral clerk recorded her answers, and Odelia asked that no accusation be entered before the drafting tools were examined. Leora's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. I wrote the instruction. Did you choose the third healing line? Odelia asked. No. Did Minister Drome dictate the wording? Not directly. Selvar's counsel rose. Then the authorship question is answered. It has begun, Odelia said. Leora explained that emergency requests were drafted from a ministry phrasebook. A routing slip arrived with a category mark, urgency level, and requested treaty section. The clerk selected the matching language, copied it onto the instruction sheet, and returned the completed order to the routing desk. Whose routing seal was on this request? Orlan asked. The Treaty Ministry's War Preparation Seal. Not the minister's personal seal? No, Your Majesty. Odelia saw no relief in that answer. Orlan had silenced the qualified reader before asking whether the ministry route concealed judgment inside routine procedure. Selvar inclined his head. My office prepared for the possibility of lawful retaliation, not the certainty of war. The phrasebook was carried in beneath a locked iron frame. Its pages contained pre-written language for border unrest, disputed crossings, dragon injury, civilian evacuation, and emergency truce review. Odelia turned to the section marked Active Military Movement. There were 4 approved options. The first requested a complete treaty scar set. The second requested civilian restraint and evacuation clauses. The third requested withdrawal and retaliation lines together. The fourth permitted a single clause, reading only when the requested line had no adjacent limitation affecting its use. The third healing line did have an adjacent limitation. The emergency restraint lay beneath the same siege burn. Odelia placed one finger beside the fourth option. A single clause request was not authorized unless someone determined the restraint line irrelevant. Selvar answered before Leora could. The restraint was believed unavailable. Unavailable is not irrelevant. In an active threat, the distinction may be practical rather than legal. For soldiers ordered forward, legal distinctions become graves. Orlan's expression tightened, but he did not defend himself. He had relied on the selected clause because it arrived through lawful channels. That reliance did not become harmless merely because the channel had now begun to fail under inspection. Leora was shown the original routing slip. She recognized the urgency mark and section number. Beside them, a short instruction had been written in darker ink, third healing line only. Was that note present when you received it? Odelia asked. Yes. Did you add it? No. Do you know who did? Leora looked toward Selvar's counsel, then back to the record. No. Routing slips passed through 3 desks before mine. Her answer preserved a gap. The clerk had drafted the order, but she had not selected the clause. The ministry seal proved authorized routing, not personal authorship by Selvar. Odelia requested the dispatch gate books. The outer gate had received the first casualty rider at the same hour shown in the forge ledger. The message then passed through inspection, seal verification, and royal routing before reaching the treaty forge. The early requisition had been drafted before the rider crossed the outer arch. Selvar did not retreat. The casualty report was not the only trigger. Cavalry movement had already reached us. That explains preparation, Odelia said. It does not explain selection. The phrasebook required full-set preparation when the legal trigger remained uncertain. Someone had bypassed that option and requested only the clause that could support retaliation. Orlan ordered the plate packet reopened. Inside Marek's plate family file, the conservation sheet listed 2 visible scar sections. Third, healing line and emergency restraint under burn damage. The restraint had not been lost. It had been excluded from the copied set by a notation in the margin. War relevance? None. The words had no signature. Selvar studied them without visible alarm. A conservation note is not a war order. No, Odelia said. But it determined what the war reader would never see. The neutral witness brought 6 original ministry pages written by Selvar during the same month. Odelia compared pressure depth, spacing, the hooked descent of the R, and the shortened final stroke in relevance. Her court-hand examiner repeated the comparison without hearing her conclusion. All 5 identifying habits matched. The margin note is Minister Drome's hand, the examiner said. Selvar did not deny it. I classified the material presented to me. I did not create the border movement or burn Blackwater. Odelia turned the sheet beneath cold glass. Pressure from an earlier line rose through the paper, written by the same hand before the softer phrase had covered it. Exclude restraint from immediate war set. The note did not prove Selvar had ordered the fire. It proved he had personally removed the clause that could stop retaliation before the dead made war politically usable. Orlan ordered every restriction on Ashskar's burned flank brought into the forge before Selvar's handwriting comparison was entered as a final finding. Selvar accepted the order without protest. The margin note was mine. The basis for it was royal. Odelia looked from him to the king. Orlan did not ask what Selvar meant. He already knew. The temporary restraint between the two crowns had been acknowledged at dawn, but only for 12 hours. Eastern commanders denied responsibility for the village fire and refused to withdraw from Blackwater Ridge. Western troops remained behind their boundary stones. When the suspension expired, either army could claim the other had resumed unlawful preparation. Odelia's standing was extended again, this time to the records used to classify scar material for war reading. It still did not restore her office or permit her to issue a binding treaty interpretation. Each new permission existed because Orlan's earlier certainty had failed. The Dragon Access Register arrived under military seal. It recorded every healer, scale reader, armorer, and treaty witness permitted near Ashka after the Western campaign. For the first month, the burned flank had been examined only for infection. In the second, 2 handlers were injured when a pressure comb touched the scar beneath the 3rd healing line. After that, access ended. A royal restriction appeared across the page. No full reading of the burned command field without direct crown authorization. Orlan's signature stood beneath it. Selvar rested his fingers on the outer rail. The living source was legally unavailable. I classified the adjacent restraint as unusable for immediate war review. Unavailable for contact, Odelia said. Not absent from law, the forge requires a living match. For a new binding reading, not for preserving the complete context of an existing treaty. She asked for the rule governing damaged or inaccessible dragon scars. The neutral clerk found it in the old comparison code. When living contact could not be safely obtained, every surviving plate from the same wound field had to be copied together. No single clause could be separated from an adjacent limit until neutral readers reviewed the entire preserved set. Selvar's expression did not change. That assumes the preserved set is trustworthy. It assumes doubt must remain visible. He turned toward Orlan. Your Majesty's restriction made living confirmation impossible. Marek Brant's plate had a broken custody chain. I chose the clause supported by current border intelligence. You chose the clause that permitted force, Odelia said. I chose the clause the crown might need. Orlan's face remained hard, and excluded the one that could delay it. Selvar met his gaze. Under a restriction you signed. The words entered the record. Odelia did not rescue Orlan from them. The access register contained 4 denied petitions. 2 came from dragon healers seeking to reopen fused scales. 1 came from a military historian. The last carried Marek Brant's name. Odelia recognized the pressure of his writing before the clerk unfolded the page. Marek had requested a neutral examination of Ashskar's burned flank and all surviving plates from the same wound field. His petition stated that a scar cut during the Western campaign had healed beneath later siege damage and could alter the meaning of the 3rd healing line. The petition did not identify the hidden scar's full wording. It did not accuse Selvar or name a falsified copy. Marek had asked only that the wound be read before any future war claim relied on it. The request had been denied under Crown security. Orlan's seal closed the bottom. Odelia read the denial twice. You knew he was asking to reopen the command field. I knew he believed another scar lay beneath it. And you barred the examination. Ashkar had broken a handler's spine. Then you could have ordered plate review. The plates were disputed. So you sealed both paths. The forge went quiet. Orlan did not apologize. Yes, the answer carried no comfort. It was only the first clean shape of his responsibility. Selvar used it immediately. The ministerial classification followed the Crown's determination that the field could not be relied upon. No, Odelia said. The Crown restricted examination. It did not repeal the restraint. A low sound moved through the eastern arch. Ashskar stood beyond the bronze shutters, heat misting from his burned side. Orlan looked toward him and spoke the beginning of the old calming phrase. "Hold the heat." Odelia stopped him. That phrase was never yours to use as a private command. His attention returned to her. "It was an instruction for lawful witness," she said. "Not a way to make him endure what the Crown refuses to record." Orlan did not finish the words. The military annex to Marek's denied petition was opened next. Most of it concerned handler risk, damaged scales, and post-war instability. One page had been folded inward and sealed with the king's personal campaign mark. Orlan told the clerk to open it. Selvar's counsel objected that a campaign seal exceeded the current inquiry. "The inquiry reached it through my order," Orlan said. Inside was a brief memorandum written in his hand. It recorded that Ashskar's burned flank contained an unresolved command scar from the final Western assault. Reading it, Orlan had written, could require review of the victory command issued that night. Odelia felt Marek's absence like a hand closing around the room. The legality of the victory command remained unresolved. Orlan's prior knowledge did not. At the bottom, beneath the Crown security denial, stood one final instruction. Do not release Marek Brant's plate for neutral comparison. Orlan placed his campaign memorandum beneath a separate seal and ordered the execution records for Marek's denied petition brought into the forge. No one called the order repentance. It was an audit of how his restriction had been used. Selvar stood at the outer rail with his counsel beside him. The Crown barred neutral comparison. My ministry later received a damaged plate under emergency recovery. Those are separate acts. Then the records will keep them separate, Odelia said. Her standing widened only to the execution of the campaign restriction and the transfer of the disputed plate. She still could not reopen the treaty office, issue a binding scar reading, or speak for either Crown. Orlan had not returned what he had taken. He had merely allowed her to follow the harm farther. The 12-hour suspension had less than 8 hours remaining. An Eastern reply had reached Lorne before noon. The Eastern Crown accepted continued restraint only if Western riders withdrew from 2 disputed watch roads. Western commanders claimed those roads lay inside their lawful patrol line. The border threat remained real, and neither side had been cleared. Selvar used that fact without hesitation. While we study old seals, 2 armies are measuring the same road from opposite maps. A disputed road is why the full treaty matters, Odelia said, not why one clause may replace it. The campaign execution ledger arrived with 3 attached orders. The first repeated Orlan's restriction: no neutral access to Ashskar's burned command field. The second barred release of Marek's plate outside Crown custody. The third authorized internal movement for preservation, conservation, or military security. That third order created the passage Selvar's office had later used. Orlan read it in silence. Odelia did not let silence become distance. You closed the public door and left an internal one. I left a way to protect damaged evidence. You left a way to move it without the reader who knew what it contained. His face did not soften. Yes, the admission entered the record. It did not restore Marek's reputation or Odelia's authority. A transfer slip showed that, 3 days after Marek died, the plate had left the campaign archive under the internal preservation exception. The release bore a Crown campaign countersign, stamped by Orlan's war secretary. The receiving line bore the Treaty Ministry intake mark. Selvar pointed to the distinction immediately. The plate entered my ministry for preservation. No war use was authorized. Who requested the transfer? Odelia asked. The request field was blank. The neutral clerk examined the paper beneath angled light. A line had been scraped away before the receiving mark dried. The remaining pressure could not be read as a name, only as a title, ending in ministerial office. "That does not identify me," Selva said. "No," Odelia answered. "It identifies an office-level request that someone later tried to remove." The conservation room log was opened next. On the day of intake, the damaged plate had been cleaned, measured, and wrapped in ash cloth. No rubbing was recorded. 2 days later, a silver pressure comb and soot tray were checked out under emergency material review. The return entry listed black residue on the comb's inner teeth. Odelia asked for the tool. It had been recast 8 months ago. Selva's counsel objected to any inference from a destroyed instrument. Tools are recast when damaged. Black residue may come from any scar plate. "Correct," Odelia said. "The log proves access to copying tools after intake. It does not prove which plate they touched. Again, the limit entered the record." A conservation assistant named Bramwell Say had signed the checkout. He was old enough to have served before Selva took office, and frightened enough to answer too quickly. "I did not copy it." Odelia waited. Bramwell closed his eyes. "I prepared the tools." "For whom?" "A closed-room review." "Who entered?" "I was ordered not to record names." "By whom?" He looked toward Selva, then toward Orlan. "By a routing instruction carrying both campaign security and treaty priority." Selva's expression remained controlled. A dual priority mark could be generated by authorized staff in either office. Orlan ordered the mark ledger opened. The dual mark had been created only once that month. Its crown half came from the Standing Security Authority in his third order. Its treaty half came from Selva's ministry routing desk. Neither half proved which man had asked for the copy. Together, they proved the plate had been made available for a closed review after neutral comparison had been forbidden. Odelia read Marrick's denied petition again. Attached to its final page was a line she had not seen because the military annex had concealed it beneath the campaign seal. "If the plate is moved without the living reader present, record the full wound field before any clause is separated." Marrick had anticipated the exact failure. Selva's counsel said, "A recommendation is not law." "No," Odelia said, "but its removal explains how the third line became clean enough to misuse." The forge bell sounded once. 7 hours remained before the suspension expired. Orlan ordered the closed-room review packet produced. The ministry vault returned an empty folder. An empty folder did not prove destruction. The pages could have been transferred under lawful security, but the missing packet joined the ministry's selective copying to the campaign concern Orlan had kept from neutral readers until this inquiry. Its inventory strip showed that 3 pages had once been inside: a pressure copy, a conservation note, and a witness sheet. All had been withdrawn 6 months earlier under War Readiness Authority. The withdrawal bore no personal signature. It carried one destination: the Dragon King's private campaign archive. Orlan closed every Western archive door before the forge bell finished its second stroke. No clerk entered alone. No campaign officer carried a key without a neutral witness beside him. The packet from Marrick's plate review would be traced inside the archive that had received it, not assumed guilty because of its destination. Selva watched the seals set. If the missing pages entered the king's archive, then my ministry did not control their final custody. "Final custody is not the same as origin," Odelia said. Orlan extended her standing to the archive routing chain, and nothing beyond it. She could inspect intake, review, withdrawal, and summary records connected to the 3 missing pages. She still could not issue a treaty ruling or reclaim the office from which she had been removed. The suspension at Blackwater had 6 hours remaining. The private archive lay behind the western wall of the forge, where campaign orders were stored by battle rather than by author. Its keeper, Mistress Eleanor Voss, opened the Western Victory Cabinet beneath 3 seals. She had served 2 reigns, and did not look toward Orlan for permission after each page. The closed-room packet had entered the cabinet 11 months earlier. Its inventory strip matched the empty ministry folder. Pressure copy, conservation note, witness sheet. The packet itself was gone. In its place lay a condensed campaign brief, marked reviewed in Orlan's hand. Odelia did not touch it until the witness clerk recorded the seal, page count, and binding thread. The brief summarized Ashskar's burned command field in 4 lines. It described the 3rd healing line as available for emergency military interpretation. It described the adjacent restraint as damaged, historical, and without present war relevance. Orlan's initials stood beneath the summary. "You read this," Odelia said. "I read the brief, not the attached records. They were not attached when it reached me." Selvar's counsel spoke immediately. Then the Crown approved a ministerial conclusion without receiving the underlying packet. That is an archive failure, not proof of false drafting. Odelia kept her attention on Orlan. "You signed a conclusion while the evidence remained elsewhere." "Yes." The answer did not absolve him because it was cleanly given. His initials had made the summary usable by every officer below him. Mistress Voss opened the cabinet ledger. Condensed briefs could replace full packets in the king's immediate drawer, only if the removed pages were indexed separately and every exclusion identified. Here, the exclusion field contained one word: duplicative. A witness sheet cannot be duplicative of a pressure copy, Odelia said. One records what the scar showed, the other records who saw how it was taken. Selvar remained composed. "Unless the witness sheet repeated a certification already preserved elsewhere, then we will find that certification." The binding thread offered the first answer. 3 punctures marked where the original packet had been sewn. The brief used only 2. Between the pressure summary and conservation abstract, a page had once rested long enough to leave an ash fiber edge. Mistress Voss brought the cabinet withdrawal book. The pressure, copy, and conservation note had been removed for royal condensation by War Secretary Darren Cole. The witness sheet had been routed separately to the Treaty Ministry for legal clarification. All 3 movements were permitted under Orlan's internal security order. Again, his restriction had created the lawful path. Darren was brought from the command wing. He did not deny separating the documents. "The witness sheet contained a reader's limitation," he said. Ministerial counsel was asked whether that limitation remained binding after the living flank was closed. "Who asked?" Odelia said. "I did." "On whose instruction?" "No one's. I prepared the king's campaign briefs." Selvar inclined his head slightly. "Secretary Cole sought legal clarification through the correct office." Odelia asked what returned. "A classification note, stating the restraint lacked present war relevance. Signed by the treaty minister." Selvar did not retreat. "I classified the law as it could be used then. Ashskar's flank was closed by royal order, and the plate chain was damaged. An unverified restraint could not control active defense. A doubtful restraint cannot be erased because certainty favors war," Odelia said. "It was not erased. It was classified. A treaty read in pieces becomes a weapon before it becomes law." Orlan ordered the ministry classification produced. A copy remained attached to Darren's outgoing correspondence. Selvar's signature was authentic. The note did not direct anyone to falsify the 3rd line. It argued that the restraint could not be invoked without living confirmation, and therefore need not appear in an operational brief. The reasoning was circular. Orlan's order prevented living confirmation. Selvar then used the absence of living confirmation to remove the restraint from the brief Orlan signed. Still, the note did not prove either man knew the copied 3rd line had been altered. Odelia requested the back of the campaign brief be examined beneath cold glass. Pressure marks emerged from the missing witness sheet that had once rested beneath it. Most were too faint to read. One sentence survived. Full wound field comparison required before retaliation use. Marek's name appeared below it. Orlan stared at the impression. That warning was under the page I signed. Under it, Odelia said, and excluded from what you chose to read. Mistress Voss turned to the later access ledger. The original witness sheet had returned from the ministry, entered the private archive, and remained sealed for months. Then it had been withdrawn again. The withdrawal occurred the night before Selvar's office requested the third healing line for immediate war reading. A personal seal could prove authorized access. It could not prove what happened after the page left. Mistress Voss turned the ledger toward the witnesses. The seal belonged to Selvar Drome. Selvar ordered the personal seal custody ledger opened before anyone could treat his mark as a confession. My seal authorizes access, he said. It does not prove my hand carried the witness sheet from the archive. The distinction was valid. Orlan directed that the seal box, delegation register, archive exit tokens, and ministry night routing books be examined under separate witnesses. Odelia's standing widened to those records alone. She remained a temporary living scar witness, not the restored reader of the treaty forge. 3 hours and 40 minutes remained before the joint suspension expired. An Eastern message had accepted restraint along the river road, but rejected withdrawal from Blackwater Ridge. Western scouts confirmed wagons behind the Eastern cavalry line. No report established whether they carried weapons, food, or refugees. The threat remained unresolved, and Selvar made certain the court remembered it. You may inspect every mark in Lorne, he said. At sunset, the armies will still require a lawful answer. A lawful answer cannot be built from the warning you removed, Odelia said. Then prove I removed it. The personal seal was kept in a double-locked iron case. Selvar held one key. His senior routing deputy, Tovin Mir, held the other. During emergency hours, both men could authorize the die's release to a bonded clerk, but the seal had to be returned before the next bell. The night the witness sheet left Orlan's archive, the case had opened once. Tovin's name appeared in the release column. He was brought to the forge and questioned apart from Selvar. Tovin admitted opening the case, but denied taking the seal to the archive. Minister Drome ordered 3 border memoranda sealed before midnight, he said. I released the die to the bonded clerk and remained in the routing room. Which clerk? Odelia asked. Usepa Thorne. Isabet's work record showed that she sealed the memoranda, returned them, and signed the die back into the case. Her time mark fell 19 minutes before the archive withdrawal. Selvar's counsel pointed to the gap. Anyone with both keys could have reopened the case without creating a second release if the first entry was left active. Anyone with both keys, Odelia agreed. That does not mean Minister Drome did. The seal itself had been recut after a chipped border tooth the previous winter. Bonded clerks used an authorized duplicate made before the damage. The archive ledger impression carried the newer chipped tooth. Only the master die could have made it. Tovin looked toward Selvar. I did not reopen the case. Selvar's voice remained level. Then someone used my key or entered falsely. The mark narrowed access. It did not yet identify the hand. Orlan ordered the key custody slips produced. Selvar's key had never been recorded outside his possession. Tovin's had been surrendered to the night guard when he left the ministry wing. The guard's statement confirmed the time, but not whether a copy existed. No key record can establish what occurred inside a closed office, Selvar said. No, Odelia replied. It establishes that your explanation now requires an unrecorded key, a false entry, or unauthorized use of the master die. For the first time, the room around Selvar seemed smaller. The archive exit token showed that the witness sheet had left in a red legal tube. A palace courier, Henrik Sorn, had carried it to the Treaty Ministry's private receiving room. Henrik remembered the delivery because the tube bore both Crown Security Cord and Odelia Brant's reader tag. "To whom did you give it?" Odelia asked. The receiving room was empty. The instruction plate said to place it in the minister's locked tray. Selvar's counsel objected. "A tray is not a person." The objection entered. The locked tray register showed retrieval 9 minutes later under the master seal. No recipient name appeared because personal ministerial trays were exempt from staff countersign. Orlan's expression hardened. "That exemption ends tonight." Odelia looked at him. "Changing the door after the record passed through it does not repair this one." "No," he said. He did not ask her to mistake reform for absolution. The ministry night routing book recorded the sheet's next movement. It had been sent to legal classification, then redirected before dawn to non-treaty Dragon medical storage. The destination made no procedural sense. Witness limitations belonged with treaty evidence, not treatment records. Selvar answered before Odelia asked. The sheet described an unstable burned flank. Medical storage could lawfully hold a duplicate. Was it a duplicate? The routing line does not say. The Dragon Infirmary produced its intake ledger. One folded sheet had arrived under the label Handler Risk Reference. It carried no Marek tag, no witness classification, and no notation connecting it to the third healing line. The infirmary keeper had not destroyed it. She had sealed it inside a chest of obsolete injury records because no healer had requested it. Orlan offered his campaign key for the chest. Odelia did not take it. "Neutral keeper," she said. A forged witness opened the chest while every hand remained above the rail. The original witness sheet lay inside, smoke-stained but intact. Marek's signature stood beneath the pressure comparison. His note did not identify who had altered the copied scar or who had moved troops at Blackwater. It recorded that the third healing line could not be used alone because the emergency restraint changed its force whenever both armies remained in disputed motion. On the reverse was a later classification written in Selvar's hand. Retain physical sheet in medical custody. Exclude reader limitation from operational record. Selvar read the words without looking away. "I removed an unverified limitation from a military brief," he said. "I did not falsify the living scar, burn the village, or command the Eastern Cavalry." Odelia placed the sheet beside the summary Orlan had signed. "No," she said. "You made certain the king could approve war without seeing the sentence that made his approval unlawful. The sheet did not prove Selvar had created the false rubbing. It proved he had knowingly hidden the warning that would have stopped Orlan from using it. Then, cold glass raised one final pressure line beneath Marek's signature. The third healing turn has already been changed in copy. Orlan ordered the witness sheet, Marek's final index, and every surviving copy descended from the third healing line placed in one sealed chain. No war reading could proceed until that chain was mapped. Selvar did not resist the order. The sheet says, "A copy was changed." It does not say which copy, who changed it, or whether the change was an unlawful alteration rather than a damaged line reconstructed under accepted practice. Odelia looked at the later classification in his hand. Then, accepted practice will either protect you or expose what you called practice. Her standing widened to copy lineage review. It did not restore her office, her right to certify a treaty, or the authority Orlan had removed before signing for war. The king opened another narrow inquiry because the evidence had forced him to. Odelia did not call that justice. Less than 2 hours remained on the joint suspension. The neutral clerk began with Marek's pressure note. Beneath cold glass, a shallow series mark appeared beside his warning. C3, First Clarity Generation. The official register identified it as a working copy, made from the damaged silver plate, during the closed room review, 3 days after Marek's death. The date could not be right. "Marek wrote this before he died," Odelia said. The clerk checked the archive calendar. The C3 designation had been entered into the register after the collapse, but the characters themselves existed earlier, on an unnumbered conservation folio. Someone had later used the old designation as though it had begun only after Marek could no longer challenge it. Selvar's counsel leaned forward. "That proves poor indexing. It proves the copy family existed before its official birth," Odelia said. "Nothing more yet." The Ministry conservation folios were brought from locked storage. 2 pages had been cut away, but their thread stubs remained. A 3rd page held a pressure overlay of Ashskar's burned wound field. 1 line curved inward beneath the siege, burn, and returned toward the emergency restraint. That inward turn made the 3rd healing line dependent on joint restraint whenever both armies remained in disputed motion. A 2nd overlay lay beneath it. The inward return had been straightened. The altered line no longer touched the restraint. Read alone, it authorized immediate retaliation. Selvar studied the 2 patterns. A clarity overlay reconstructs the most probable course of a damaged scar. It does not claim to be a fresh living impression. Then it must be labeled conjectural, Odelia said, and reviewed beside the complete wound field. The living field was closed under Crown order. The plate was not. Orlan stood beyond the witness rail, his earlier restriction open before him. He had made the living source inaccessible. He had signed the brief built from the reconstructed line. Even if Selvar had shaped the copy, Orlan's orders had given the shape authority. The conservation code required any reconstructed turn to carry 3 things: the original damaged contour, the proposed correction, and a neutral reader's objection or assent. The folio contained only the proposed correction. Odelia requested the missing cut pages be traced through removal slips. 1 had gone to the King's campaign archive as part of the condensed brief. The other had been routed to ministerial, legal review. The campaign page survived inside a discarded backing sheet. It preserved Marek's objection in full. Do not straighten the return. Burn interruption does not erase scar direction. Full wound field comparison required before retaliation use. Marek had signed and dated it 6 hours before the Western Archive collapsed. His warning had not been written after grief, rumor, or a border emergency. He had seen the altered clarity pattern while the original plate still remained under his protection. Orlan read the objection without touching the page. "This never reached the brief I approved." "No," Odelia said. "But the system you closed around him made removal easy." He accepted the sentence without asking her to lessen it. The legal review page had not survived, but its removal slip named the drafter who received it. Selvar Drome. Selvar's counsel objected. Receipt of an objection does not prove rejection of it. The objection was entered. Odelia asked for Selvar's outgoing classification drafts from the same day. Most concerned supply roads and prisoner exchanges. 1 unsigned draft addressed damaged dragon scars. Its first paragraph repeated accepted conservation law. Its second contained a handwritten instruction: flatten inward return for operational clarity. Burned interruption renders adjacent restraint non-operative under present war relevance. The handwriting examiner compared it with Selvar's margin notes, classification order, and private tray entries. The instruction is his. Selvar did not deny the hand. "I made a legal judgment from a damaged source," he said. The Crown had barred living confirmation. The border had remained unstable since the campaign. I did not invent Ashskar's wound. "You changed the direction of the scar in copy," Odelia said. "I reconstructed it." "You removed the contour," Marek's objection, and the label that would have told every later reader the line was conjectural. "I classified disputed material for operational use. A disputed reconstruction cannot become clean law because you hide the dispute." Selvar's control finally showed strain, though his voice remained measured. "None of this proves I burned Blackwater, ordered Eastern cavalry, or knew when casualties would arrive. No, Odelia said. It proves you knowingly made retaliation appear independent of the restraint and preserved that appearance for the next war reading. The finding was entered with its limits. Selvar had authorized the altered clarity pattern. He had removed Merrick's objection from the operational chain. He had hidden the surviving witness limitation in medical storage. The record still did not establish who burned the village, or whether Eastern movement violated another part of the treaty. Orlan suspended Selvar from treaty custody pending full judgment. He did not call the act punishment enough. The final suspension bell began to toll. A border rider entered, carrying the Eastern Crown's answer. They would hold Blackwater Ridge for 1 additional hour, but only if the West presented the complete living wound field under neutral readers from both crowns. Odelia looked toward Ashskar beyond the Bronze Arch. The reading that could stop both armies required the very authority Orlan had taken from her, and access forbidden by the order he had signed. 1 hour remained for him to dismantle both. Orlan broke his own campaign restriction before the final suspension bell completed its second stroke. He placed the order that had barred Ashskar's burned flank beneath the forge flame and signed its revocation in front of both crowns' witnesses. "Open the command field," he said. "Restore Mistress Brant's full treaty authority for this reading." Odelia did not move. "For this reading?" she asked. The wording stopped him. Orlan looked at the temporary standing orders stacked beside the witness rail. Each one had widened her authority only where his earlier decisions required repair. "No," he said. "Restore the office publicly. Return every certification, seal, and right of instruction removed after Merrick's death. Record that the suspension was imposed without a lawful finding against her work." The neutral clerk entered the order. 2 senior treaty readers countersigned it. Selvar's suspended counsel was permitted to object, and did. "A royal restoration cannot establish that her interpretation is correct." "It does not," Odelia said. "The living comparison will do that or it will not." Her office returned before she touched the scar. That distinction mattered. The Eastern Crown's neutral reader entered through the river gate beneath a white truce banner. A Western reader, unaffiliated with Selvar, joined her. Neither answered to Orlan. Neither accepted Odelia's conclusion in advance. Ashskar was brought beneath the open bronze arch without chains. Dragon healers cooled the fused edges of his burned flank, while Odelia set the comparison frame along the third healing line. She did not use the old phrase to soothe him. She spoke it as law before witnesses. Hold the heat where truth can bear it. Orlan remained outside the inner rail. The blue fire entered the burned command field. First came the third healing turn, not straight as Selvar's clarity overlay had shown, but curving inward beneath the siege burn. Then the hidden return brightened and joined the emergency restraint. The 2 scars answered as one legal structure. The neutral readers repeated the pressure test separately. Both obtained the same result. Retaliation remained barred, while both armies occupied disputed motion lines, and neither crown had completed joint civilian review. The reading did not declare the Eastern Crown innocent. It did not determine who burned Blackwater, or whether the cavalry wagons concealed weapons. It established only that neither army could lawfully advance under the third healing line. The complete finding was sent to both borders under matched seals. At Blackwater Ridge, Western standards lowered first. The Eastern cavalry withdrew 1 road beyond the disputed stones after neutral riders confirmed the Western withdrawal. The additional hour expired without an arrow crossing the valley. Only then did the Forge Court turn to judgment. Selvar stood without ministerial seal or custody rights. He did not confess to burning the village because the evidence did not prove he had. He admitted no conspiracy beyond what the documents already established. The judgment did not need more. He had authorized a reconstructed scar line without labeling it conjectural. He had removed the adjacent restraint from operational review, excluded Merrick's objection, hidden the witness limitation in medical storage, and prepared the selected clause for immediate war use before casualty reports reached the forge. He was stripped of treaty office and remanded for trial on falsification of legal context, unlawful suppression of witness material, and preparation of a war reading from an incomplete scar set. The Blackwater Fire and Eastern Troop Movement remained under a separate joint inquiry. Caldus Wren remained missing, not condemned in absence. The 3 copyists were cleared of intentional falsification. Their records were corrected to show what each had actually handled. Merrick Brant's death entry was opened next. The old record described him as an obsessive reader who had endangered himself retrieving disputed material from a collapsing archive. Odelia read the correction aloud. Merrick Brant died preserving an original scar plate and its emergency restraint context after identifying an altered clarity copy. His evidence was later separated, misclassified, and suppressed. No finding establishes that his death was ordered by any person presently accused. The correction did not give Odelia her husband back. It returned the truth he had died carrying. Orlan then surrendered his campaign memorandum, archive approvals, and silence order to independent Crown review. He did not ask the court to distinguish haste from responsibility. "I silenced the only qualified reader who could challenge the copy," he said. "I signed retaliation before requiring living comparison. I restricted the source, approved a summary without its excluded witness sheet, and allowed procedure to turn doubt into authority." No one knelt. No one praised the admission. The law changed because admission was not enough. The war-reading silent seal was restricted. It could no longer be used against the sole qualified reader of a disputed living source. No retaliation clause could be invoked from copied dragon scars, without either living comparison or neutral full-set certification. Adjacent restraint lines could not be removed for operational relevance. Personal seal access required, named retrieval and return. Ashscar's burned flank was placed under joint healer-reader protection and could not be used as a war trigger without independent review. Weeks later, Odelia returned to the lower area after the final statute was sealed. Orlan waited beyond Ashscar's resting circle without armor or crown. "I remember the phrase," he said. "So do I. I will not ask you to speak it for me." For the first time, she believed he understood why. He offered no private apology meant to replace public repair. He asked whether he might remain in Lorne under the new Treaty Council, subject to the same witness rules as every other commander. "You may remain," Odelia said. "Trust will not return, because the law has. I know, and if it returns, it will do so by what you do when no war is forcing you to listen." He bowed his head once, not as a king claiming forgiveness, but as a man accepting terms. Ashscar turned his burned side toward the open moonlight. This time, no one mistook witness for choosing. Odelia stood beside the dragon, her seal restored, Merrick's name corrected, and the treaty whole enough to resist the next convenient lie. When Orlan took his place beyond the witness rail, she did not send him away. She did not call him closer. Not yet.